I don't even know what I did. All right. So hello, online people. Hi, all 7 of you. That's pretty cool. Yeah. So the Buford's cavalry division meets the Red force, the Confederate force, outside of the town, and Buford decides we have to hold this ground. Like, this is where we can make our stand. We have great defensive positions, even though they're vastly outnumbered by the Confederate forces. They're able to set up a very good, just the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. You're able to set up these skirmish lines and slowly move back to delay the advance. So with Buford's division outside of Gettysburg at 5 a.m. in the morning, they engage some of the very first Confederates at Gettysburg, along with Caliph's battery of 2 cannons, I believe, and they delay the Confederates. Buford is calling for reinforcements from the nearby Army of the Potomac, and the only ones that are close is the 1st and 11th Corps. So 1st Corps is them, and then the 11th Corps is behind them. So Reynolds goes ahead, rides forward of his marching 1st Corps. The guys of the Iron Brigade, they know something's coming. They know an engagement's happening, or like is going to happen, but they're not sure of the magnitude. They're just told we have to get going. We have to pack up and start moving down the Emmitsburg Pike. So and I'll get a map up here shortly so you guys can see, kind of visualize when I start naming these places around Gettysburg. You'll be able to understand what's kind of visualize what's going on. So Reynolds rides head of the column to meet Buford. They evaluate the situation, and Reynolds agrees that this is really good defensible ground. So instead of fighting through the city, they're going to hold outside the city on the ridge lines to delay the Confederates until they can wait for the rest of the 7 corps of the Army of the Potomac to arrive to help defeat the Confederates. So the 1st Corps arrives. This is a very nice painting of the 1st Corps arriving. I think it's pretty cool. But so after a really long march, it's really hot, really dusty. It was said that, the guys were just choking up with the dust just because it was a hot summer day, and just even on gravel roads, driving your car, you can tell it's really, those dust clouds really form. So they're marching down, but they're in really good spirits. They know that they're going to be doing something good. So 4,000 men of the 1st Division arrive outside the town. They're ready to be put into action. They form into line of battle outside the town, and then are able to be are able to be seeing that this is good defensible ground, that they, even though are going to be outnumbered, they have the advantage of terrain. So there's 2 brigades that arrive, the 2nd Brigade and the 1st Brigade. 1st Brigade is the Iron Brigade. 2nd Brigade is Cutler's Brigade, ironically called the Iron Brigade of the East, which I think is kind of interesting that there's 2, I guess, Iron Brigades, but the Western Iron Brigade is the more well-known one. So they form into line of battle. So that means they get ready. They're formed into lines, and they're starting their push up to the position just to the left. I think I have a map here. Yeah. So they come around up the road. Oh, yeah, sorry. So they come up the road, which is at the bottom of Gettysburg. That's the north. They come up the road, form to the ridge line you can kind of see, which is Seminary Ridge. And that's the point, the focal point that Buford's been defending for the last, I want to say, 4 hours since 5 a.m. It's about 9-10 o'clock now. So they form the line of battle, and they move down the unfinished railroad, which will have the railroad cut, which we'll get to, and the Chambersburg Pike. So that's where the Confederate forces are moving down. And please mind my MS Paint thing, but it helps to give you an idea of where these very generalized movements are being made. But so then McPherson's Woods, which is right there, and Willoughby Run, which is right there. And those will become very important locations for the upcoming engagement. Just want to double check I'm not. So let's go back here. So with these brigades ready to go, Reynolds decides he needs to push them forward to help relieve the cavalry that's being engaged right now. So he decides, mind my pun, to throw forward the Iron Brigade. I decided to use the word forward, not only because they are moving forward, but because it was the motto of, it is still the state motto of Wisconsin, and the very important actually to a lot of these regiments. It was it's something they'd say before going into battle. They'd say, on Wisconsin forward. That's actually where the song name on Wisconsin comes from. Is from '64. Arthur MacArthur, Douglas MacArthur's father, actually exclaimed on Wisconsin before charging up Missionary Ridge. But back to Gettysburg. So the two brigades drop their bags. That means they take off all their extra baggage, like their backpacks, their blankets, anything really that's not necessary to them fighting. So they move to Mcpherson's Ridge, which, if we look here, is that ridge line. That's kind of where the run is. It's hard to tell on the map. There's not a great topography on it, but there is like a ridge line there. So they move towards that, and while moving up, they're it's very urgent. They're rapidly loading their rifles. The 2nd Wisconsin really unable to fully get their rifles loaded, so they're being told to just rush into the woods in front of them. Not really sure. They know the Confederates are in front of them, but they're not really sure how many, where, because they're in the woods. So they're just kind of told to go forward into the wood line and sweep them out of the woods. So the 2nd Wisconsin, like I said, is leading the movement up into this ridgeline, into the woods. And then within mere seconds, the two lines just explode. A Tennessee regiment from Archer's Brigade gets a very devastating first volley on the 2nd Wisconsin. It is set in the 2nd Wisconsin's regimental history. Within seconds, 30% of the regiment is either killed or wounded, which that's an insane number. That's 30% of around 200 guys. So that's a lot of people, and a lot of high-ranking officers are killed or wounded within this first volley. You have the lieutenant colonel who is killed. Fairchild, later governor of Wisconsin, his arm is shattered, had to be amputated. And within this volley, it is said Reynolds was killed by a sharpshooter. I personally don't really believe that. I think it was since he was on horseback personally leading these troop movements, he was killed in just a high shot from the volley. I don't know. I think it just makes more logical sense that just with all these bullets being shot at him, just stray one hit him. And Reynolds' death is extremely devastating to the battle. Like, he is the most important person on the field of battle for the Union at this moment. So that is just gone. All in his plans, completely gone. So his successor, Doubleday, had to move on the fly. He didn't know any of Reynolds' plans. He knew that we have to defend the position, but really not how or why. We just kind of got to be here. So I want to make it very clear. Reynolds' death is extremely, extremely devastating, which is, it really hampers the Union's advance. But even with this, they still plunge forward into the woods. And so in the woods, you'll have the 2nd and 7th Wisconsin, along with the 19th Indiana and 24th Michigan. But I'll be focusing on the 2nd and 7th because, we're from Wisconsin. I wanted to, and their movements were pretty much similar, so it kind of makes it a little easier to concentrate that. But so these lines are fighting about 40 yards apart, which, you can imagine with accurate rifled muskets, that's close. So it's very, very, very devastating for both of these, for both units. And within 30 minutes of fighting, the Iron Brigade is able to push Archer's Brigade out of the woods and capturing 75 Confederates, including Archer himself, by Private Malloy Maloney of the 2nd Wisconsin, who later actually would die later that day. And then a quote from Colonel Robinson, who was leading the 7th Wisconsin. The enemy, if I can move I can't. The enemy, what was able of them that were able to walk, threw down their arms. I'm sorry, I wish the little box there was not there, but we deal with it. So here's the map. You can see, so the bottom one with the arrow, that's them pushing them out of the woods. And then Cutler's brigade kind of pivots because they see so Archer's brigade, Davis's brigade for the Confederates. Oh, wow. Thank you. So Archer's brigade is here. Cutler's brigade, Archer's brigade here. Davis's brigade is here. Cutler is pivoted while the Iron Brigade is pushing into the woods up to Willoughby Run. And it's hard to explain, but just from just the fighting in the woods is extremely devastating, extremely intense. It's at very close range. From what I've read in both Alan Nolan's Iron Brigade and the 2nd Wisconsin's regimental history, which are my main sources for this presentation. So, I'm not just pulling this out randomly. I did source this, guys. But no, so it's kind of hard to keep track of just how intense and confusing it is, because you'd have regiments push up too far, and then another regiment would overlap and then shoot into their side. I believe the 7th Wisconsin, the 24th Michigan overlapped the regiments of Archer's brigade and put in devastating fire. So it's really hard to keep track of all these different movements. So like I said, when I said this is very oversimplified, this drawing, it is, but it gives a good idea of what's going on. So Cutler's brigade right here is not doing too great morale-wise. They end up actually retreating back, and this becomes kind of like not good because the Confederates are able to take up an advantageous position, later disastrous position for them, in this unfinished railroad called the Railroad Cut, where it's just a big ditch, and they're able to take cover in this large trench, so giving them a lot of cover. So the Railroad Cut. Dawes of the 6th Wisconsin sees that these of Davis's brigade are making this move to the Railroad Cut, and he's like, that's kind of not good. They're going to be able to shoot down into our side, and they're also entrenched. They're behind cover. So Dawes, a lot of D names. Dawes is able to rally some of the regiments from Cutler's brigade, namely the 95th and 14th Brooklyn, or 95th New York, 84th New York, and which is the 14th Brooklyn, but able to rally them for a push on the Railroad Cut. So at this point, Dawes is in the reserve, so he's kind of farther back behind all the fighting, but he sees this and does this. So on horseback, he's advancing with his regiment, and while advancing, his horse is shot out from under him, and he goes down. And it said that he sprang right back up, and the line cheered for him because they were just like, let's go. That's the fighting attitude we want to have here. So he continues the advance on foot, rallies the 14th Brooklyn and 95th New York, and they decide to make a push on the Railroad Cut. So over 150 yards from a fence line, so there's a fence line here, and then to the Railroad Cut, over 150 yards, they jump over the fence, and within that 150 yards, over half of his line goes down, like it stated here. So 160 men out of originally, I think he had 400 something plus some of the guys, but within just 150 yards, 160 men are killed or wounded. So that's one man for every yard plus. And I'll read an excerpt from Rufus Dawes's memoir called In the Service with the 6th Wisconsin. If you're ever going to read any Civil War literature, I really suggest that book. Extremely well written. He really knew how to write, and it's just a really good idea into not just the battles, but the camp life as well, and just the privations of living in the field at the time. So, and this kind of goes along with the picture that's happening here. So, Corporal Eggleston of Company H sprang forward to seize the flag, which, they're fighting for this flag. That's kind of the focal point in the center of this railroad cut. So, sprang forward to seize it and was shot and mortally wounded. Private Anderson of Company H, furious at the killing of his brave young comrade, wrecked little for the rebel color, but swung aloft his musket and with a terrific blow, split the skull of the rebel who had shot young Eggleston. This soldier was well known in the regiment as Rocky Mountain Anderson, just based on his large stature and just being a big guy. Lieutenant Remington was shot in the shoulder while going for the flag. Into this deadly melee came Corporal Francis A. Waller, which is that guy for the people on the stream, who seized and held the rebel flag. So he actually would receive the Medal of Honor for this action. And let's move on. So that's the push towards there. And the rest of the brigade's push towards Willoughby Run. Like I stated, both of these were very successful. They captured 225 Confederates in the railroad cut. Dawes, I think, was holding at one point 6 different swords from officers that came up to surrender to him. So he said in his book that he's trying to clumsily hold on to all these swords while trying to maintain the cohesion of his line, because they were actually all like standing on the bank of it, aiming at the Confederates. And he's like, we can't, just kill these guys. That's not right. So he said that it was really shocking and hard on him trying to just manage all this. And I think he's still in his like late 20s too at the time, which is really young and kind of shocking, because I'm 21. I think that to be put in a situation like that is kind of scary. So there's a lull in the fighting with capturing these Confederate brigades and really wiping them off the field completely. Some of them just not being brought back into action for the day, or just for the rest of the battle, just because of being so thoroughly whipped. But the Confederate artillery really made it apparent that they did not want to retreat. They were going to keep contesting this. So Doubleday realizes this, and he tells the brigade, we're going to hold Willoughby Run at all costs. So they hold that, and once the Confederates decide to advance again, it just very bloody. They're not giving any ground until it is ordered that they're going to start to withdraw slowly, kind of like what Buford's cavalry was doing at the beginning of the day, but very slowly withdrawing back up to Seminary Ridge, which is right here. And that's where they're going to kind of make their final stand. That's where they're going to really like just hold them off for as long as they can to buy time, because this is really just an action to buy time for the rest of the Army of the Potomac to arrive. So they're fighting, and they start to withdraw, and it's said that you could actually I wish I would have wrote down this source, but it is I think it was from Colonel Morrow of the 24th Michigan, but you could see where they were advancing, because there would just be a line of bodies just of killed and wounded up the slope. And but so they were really making them work for this advance, though. And once they reach Seminary Ridge, there was a barricade of just simple breastworks made by the 95th New York previously. So they take cover in this barricade, and they wait for the Confederates that are still advancing. There's 3 divisions now closing in on them in this one brigade, which is extreme. They're very, 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 very outnumbered. So they start making their advance, and they wait for them to get in close with the coordinated fire of 4th U.S. Battery B, which was the artillery battery that was attached to the Iron Brigade. And some other, I think it was the 2nd Maine Battery, are positioned, and they wait for the Confederates to get in close. And on the order, they all fire the cannons at the same time, with this is paraphrasing a quote. I once again forgot by who, but it was as if the lanyard of every cannon there was pulled by one hand, just how coordinated and synchronized the fire was with canister and double canister. And canister is like this from a 12-pound Napoleon, which 4th U.S. Battery B had, is about this big, kind of like, think of like a coffee can filled with a bunch of metal balls, so like a big shotgun from a cannon. And they were wiping holes in the advancing Confederate lines, as well as rifle fire from the Iron Brigade and Cutler's Brigade. So they hold this ground until they get in close and realize they're going to be outnumbered, and they decide that we have to withdraw to another position, which is Cemetery Ridge, which is, it's not really shown on this map, but it's outside of Gettysburg, and that's kind of like where you hear about the famous fishhook formation, and with Little Round Top and all that. So that's kind of this really sets the scene for the next 2 days of fighting. So just remember, all that this is happening was within just from 5 a.m. to, I want to say 6 p.m. And that's not even, really I don't even say it's a half of the battle, even close to half of the battle being over. So they eventually, the Federals eventually break. The 11th Corps is completely routed. They're fighting here as well, but like I said, it'd be hard to kind of cover all that just in the time span, but they're completely routed. They're pushed off the field. The 1st Corps is really trying to hold the ground the best they can. The Iron Brigade is one of the last brigades to leave their position to buy time for everyone to get through Gettysburg and set up on Cemetery Ridge. And so when they're running through Gettysburg, I believe most of the Iron Brigade, except for the 6th Wisconsin, and it goes outside the town and forms up just below the town. So like they're around here. If you can see on my mouse, they're right about here on the map. And then the 6th Wisconsin, they're kind of lost. They're like, where are these guys? We know they're alive, but they're just not sure where. And it was because Dawes decided. So here, Dawes decided to go through the town, and there's a really interesting story he had where while they had to get from one street across to the other side, but there was a Confederate line that was shooting down the street. So and there was a fence, and he saw that there was like a small hole in the fence, and he said, okay, we're going to go in single file line. This is like 200 guys all going through a single file line, running across the street, ducking into the fence. And he said that if one guy got stuck in the fence, he'd just yank him out and so the next guy get through. And surprisingly enough, only 2 guys were killed or wounded in that movement, which I think is kind of astounding for just how concentrated that is. But so it's chaos, though, them trying to get through Gettysburg and reform. But they managed to. And another interesting story that I read from Alan Nolan's Iron Brigade is from the 7th Wisconsin. Their color bearer, their flag bearer, who has been their flag bearer since Bronner's Farm. That he's been holding the flag for the entire war so far. And within this last withdraw, he has a Confederate gun, like a canister from a Confederate cannon, hit him, and it said that the flag just shattered, like the flagpole just shattered just from the balls ripping through him, but he didn't die. He was still alive, and he was lifted onto a caisson of one of the batteries that was going through the town and was still waving the flag through the town while just the tattered remnants of the flag. And I thought that was just really interesting and a good story, just of the confusion, but showing that the morale was not really broken. And even after this, when they reformed, it's said that they were in really good spirits. They felt like they weren't defeated. They knew they had done what they were told to do. They didn't break. They didn't rout. They were proud of what they did. So I think that's being optimistic because this also did, you'll see at the end of the first day, this really took a toll on them out of the 1,883 men in the brigade that marched to Gettysburg, 1,212 of them would be captured, killed, or wounded, which that's kind of insane, in my opinion. That's, what would that be? 65%. That's, what would that be out of 10? 6 out of 6.5. Yeah, 6.5 out of 10. So just if you have a group of 10 people, 6.5 of them would have been killed, captured, or wounded in that, which that's devastating. And they would continue to fight through. They continued to fight through the rest of the war, but they wouldn't really be the same. They'd fight at, like I said, the Wilderness, at Petersburg, Appomattox, but they just really were not able to replace the ranks of their regiments just because a lot of veteran soldiers were killed. So just kind of a breakdown of just these single regiments here. So the 2nd Wisconsin took 77% casualties, so that's 1 in 3 guys pretty much being killed or wounded, almost 1 in 2 guys being killed, wounded, or captured. The 6th took 48%, the 7th took 52%, and then for the 19th Indiana and 24th Michigan, the 19th Indiana took 72% casualties, and the 24th Michigan took 80% casualties. And that pretty much finishes the first day of Gettysburg. And they'd still go on to fight for 2 days, including the Iron Brigade. They'd be put on Culp's Hill, which is on the far right. And the 6th would still see some action where they'd pretty much retake some breastworks that were taken by the Confederates during the night. Really interesting story from that. So that's the end of the slide. So now's the time for questions or just general conversation.
77% would be 3 out of 4.
Okay.
No more devastated even than.
Yeah.
So you said they went to Culp's Hill, the 2nd
Mm-hmm.
and the 7th?
Yeah. Well, the whole.
Did they go to Culp's Hill because they fought so hard the first day and they was going to be like a respite?
Kinda, yeah.
They was it?
Well, they didn't see really any more action. I think the 2nd Wisconsin took like 6 more casualties the rest of the 2 days. So like they still saw some action. They would have seen fighting there, but where they were positioned was like really on the far right, and the fighting at Culp's Hill is kind of like in the center of the area. So, but yeah.
So what happened to Lucius Fairchild then?
It's actually really interesting. He was taken off the field and then put into a house to get quickly amputated while they're fighting. And while it was said while they were retreating through Gettysburg, he was actually sitting on the front porch of the house, waving at the guys, withdrawing through Gettysburg. And when I say retreat, at least the Iron Brigade, they actually retreated in good order. They marched at the right shoulder shift to the, not, just a complete panic, not a run, but they were actually, marching in formation to there. And that's, I think, kind of interesting because when you hear about the retreat through Gettysburg, you kind of envision, I mean, if you go back to that slide, just kind of pandemonium, just panic, just because I think that's in that painting. I believe that's the 11th Corps. I'm not sure which regiment, but that's an 11th Corps regiment. But I don't know. I think that's a good kind of telling you that not everything's absolute.
Lucius Fairchild was captured then?
Yeah, he was captured briefly and then sent back, and then became the governor of Wisconsin. And
who did the amputation of his arm?
I'm not sure.
The Confederates or
no, Union surgeon.
Oh, okay.
Were there Marshfield people or men that were involved in this or locally?
Yeah. So actually, the 7th Wisconsin had Company G, which was the Grand Rapids Union Guard, not necessarily Marshfield local, but from Wisconsin Rapids. And so, I mean, I'd say it's local-ish, Wood County. And I know at Marshfield Cemetery, there's some 7th Wisconsin guys buried, but I'm not sure if they enlisted in 64 or when they enlisted, but they were in the Iron Brigade at one point. So That's pretty cool.
Not necessarily Gettysburg.
No, I mean they could have been there. I'd have to do research because I think the one guy I read about, he was transferred to 4th U.S. Battery B to help do artillery, but I'm not sure when that was. But he most likely would have been at Gettysburg if he wasn't, sick or or on furlough. Any questions from the online people?
There's a comment from a Deborah. She said, "Great job by this young man!" Exclamation point.
Thank you, Deborah. That's what we like to hear. Anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, so all the regiments of the Great, they all existed through the war. They didn't consolidate them or anything?
Okay, so it gets a little confusing,
Yeah.
but so I think in '64, the 2nd Wisconsin's like their term was up, so they were able to go home, but a lot of them actually re-enlisted as veterans, and there was like switching around, and it gets kind of confusing in '64 because of the reorganization of the Army, and this is getting kind of technical, but so you have so the brigade post Gettysburg gets transferred from 1st Corps to the 5th Corps. And I actually have a really cool thing up here that you guys can come up and see in a bit. But they get transferred to the 5th Corps, 4th Division. And they actually get kind of upset at this because they're losing. Because with this, they were the 1st Brigade of the 1st Corps, the 1st Division. So they were really, they were number one. They were happy about that. But so they were kind of upset at losing this thing. But consolidation, the 2nd Wisconsin guys, once they re-enlisted as veterans, they would go to the 7th and 6th Wisconsin. And then there was also the Independent Wisconsin Battalion, which was another thing formed of other 2nd Wisconsin guys. So it gets confusing, but yeah.
I was just gonna ask about that.
You'll get to see it. Anything else? I think you want to ask something.
Did they keep the hats throughout the war?
Yeah, actually, they pretty much kept their uniform. Obviously, it would deteriorate over time, so sometimes they, throughout the war, you'd see them wearing just your regular, kepis or forage caps. But there's actually a really interesting thing. The 19th Indiana was put, so they were consolidated, but they were put into 20th Indiana. But they were allowed to keep their 1st Corps hats as well as their 1st Corps badges as well as their hats. So I remember, I think it was the Wilderness, where the 20th Indiana guys that were next to these guys were kind of felt a little insignificant, a little, what would be the word, intimidated, because they knew that these guys were the real deal. They were the veterans that fought since '62 and stuff. So that was pretty interesting.
Did they have a celebration in Marshfield when some of these people that served came home or anything? Did you know?
Well, Marshfield wasn't made or founded till Don. What was it? 1872. So that was a couple of good years after the war. But in Madison, actually, when they came home, I kind of wish I could have seen this. It just sounded really amazing. Just they had American flags draped out all the windows when they were marching down to the Capitol building, and in real nice lines during when they're coming home, or the Grand Review. So there was a lot of the armies in Washington. There was a lot of celebration for these guys. They were very the population of Wisconsin was actually really proud of what the brigade was doing. And there was 53 other regiments from Wisconsin, but the Iron Brigade, everybody knew who they were. Everybody knew that was originally Gibbon's Western Iron Brigade. So they were really proud of them.
What brigade or unit had Old Abe?
The 8th Wisconsin.
That was an Eagle that they carried into combat with them.
And where were they out of?
Eau Claire. They were actually, I think, nicknamed the Eau Claire Badgers before they were nicknamed like the Eau Claire Eagle Regiment, which, because they had an eagle. But yeah, this is just kind of like a side note. I think it's just really something that's just kind of more morbid, I guess, but something that's just kind of interesting to me when reading Rufus Dawes's book is his change of attitude throughout it, especially once they get to like 64, 65, but he comes really just depressed. I mean, he's surrounded constantly by, death and dying and just the threat of being killed. And he it's really interesting. But what I think I was talking to my friend Damien about is just how I think it's just kind of crazy how, the morning of the first, and the night of the 30th and the morning of the first, they knew something was going to happen. And there was even written by a 4th U.S. Battery B guy when he said that, the brigade marching past them when they were marching to Gettysburg, he's like, they're never going to be the same again. And I just kind of, it's interesting to kind of, I wish I could, I don't wish, but it's just the psychology of just, knowing that the guy you're standing next to might not come back just based on just chance is really interesting. And, it's sad, but it's also I'm curious sometimes of how that played on a lot of these guys, of just knowing that, because they're not really aiming at individual people. They're aiming just at blobs. They weren't really trained to aim at, like during training, they weren't trained to aim at silhouettes or anything like the modern military does now, but they were just told, shoot straight at the guys that are shooting at you. So it's kind of, they become detached, I think. And it's just really interesting how that plays on someone.
We have another online question.
Okay.
Someone who goes by the name of Blue. How did other regiments view or say things about the Wisconsin regiments?
They actually really looked up to them. They were kind of, I'm not sure of like all Wisconsin regiments, but at least the Iron Brigade, the Wisconsin regiments and the Iron Brigade, everybody kind of knew that like these guys, like I said earlier, but these guys are it. Like these guys are the real deal. These guys are the veterans of, they really respected them. Is just short to the point.
My mother was from North Carolina, so I have cousins down there.
Yeah.
And I talked to one of my cousins about Gettysburg, and I didn't have to explain anything to her about the Wisconsin sharpshooters. She knew the major impact that they had at that battle without having any discussion. It was just such a well-known thing.
Yeah.
How they kind of commanded that. The outcome would have been completely different if it hadn't been. But I did not realize that 3 out of 4 of them were left dead on the ground.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And
About messing up your head, you're talking about. It's not whether the guy next to you, but you're in a group of 4.
yeah.
3 of you aren't coming back.
Yeah, and there's just all throughout the war you hear just these insane statistics of, and a lot of this fighting is not over prolonged 5 hours. This is like 30-minute spouts of just unbridled violence, and then it kind of reels back, they kind of reform, and then another 15 to 30 minutes of just, because I think you could fire your entire cartridge box of your muzzle loading rifle within 15 minutes of just sustained fire. So that's just another thing to take into mind, that these aren't long drawn out battles. They are, but they're really fast. Like when they're fighting, it's really fast, really, really bad.
Any more questions? You did a fabulous job, Tim.
All right, awesome. I'm happy to be here, guys.
Hold on for just a second.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So I want to thank Tim for coming tonight. It was very interesting. I'm really impressed, first of all, by your age, and you have such an interest in this. I think that,
Thank you.
yeah, it's quite telling what kind of a person he is to be able to look back at some of this stuff and have such respect for that. So I have a lot of respect for you for that.
Thank you.
I want to apologize to all of you online people for the first 5 minutes or so not having sound. I'm so glad that it finally got to work, and we're still working out a lot of bugs with all this stuff. So bear with us. Be assured, though, if you ever come to another one of these, we have them the second Thursday of every month, that when you come in person, you're always guaranteed of having a good program. So thank you all for coming out tonight. We really appreciate that. The next one is going to be the McMillan Mead Wildlife Center. Yeah. And Tom, and I can't think of his last name right now, he is going to be speaking. And I think that one in particular, we are going to try just having it be an in-person only presentation, because we're finding that more people will show up then. And sometimes when they see that it's a hybrid, people just think, oh, I'm going to watch it from my living room, which is great. But we will then tape it maybe and be able to do it later, so we get more people in person. So it's better for the speakers, I think, when we have an audience that can engage with them. So, but we appreciate you all coming out tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. It means a lot.
Thanks again, Tim. And take a look at his
Yeah, when you guys are leaving, you can come up and I'll explain what's in here.
My brother wasn't.
So that's the command